My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "You've already been replaced." She said it quietly, almost politely. Right there in the kitchen, I'd cleaned every morning for 3 years. And I remember thinking as my hands trembled over the sink that there must be some mistake mothers don't get replaced, not in their own family. Before I take you into the moment that broke my heart, tell me where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. Now, let me begin at the moment it all unraveled. The moment her words settled into the air, the whole house felt different. Not louder, not colder, just emptier, as if something had been quietly removed and I hadn't noticed until that second. The smell of fresh coffee drifted between us, but even that seemed changed. Emily always brewed hers, strong, a dark, almost bitter roast Lucas liked, and I used to find comfort in that routine, the simple promise that mornings would stay mornings. But that day, even the coffee felt distant, like it belonged to a home I was no longer welcome in. I remember gripping the edge of the porcelain sink to steady my hands. I didn't want her to see them shaking. At 70, I can still stand tall, still carry myself with some grace, but there was something in her tone that reached into the small, fragile place inside me. I try not to show anyone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. She simply said with the kind of calm that stings more than shouting, "You don't have a role in this home anymore. I've got someone else helping. Someone else," as if I were a temporary hire. As if the years I spent caring for Lucas and the 3 years helping raise my grandbaby under this very roof were nothing more than minutes she could sweep aside. I didn't argue. I wish I could tell you I said something wise or strong, but I didn't. I've lived long enough to know that some battles reveal more about a person than any words I could offer back. So I swallowed the tightness in my throat and nodded, pretending to wipe a non-existent stain on the counter just to give my hands something to do. The morning light slanted across the tiles, turning everything a pale gold, but I swear I felt a chill run all the way down my spine. For a moment we stood there, just two women sharing the same quiet space, but living in two very different worlds. Her world felt polished, efficient, untouched. Mine felt suddenly small. "I see," I finally whispered. It was all I could manage. Emily walked away without looking back, her footsteps soft against the hardwood floor. I watched her silhouette disappear down the hallway, straight-backed and certain, while I remained by the sink, breathing in the steam of coffee. I no longer felt invited to pour, and I thought that was the worst part. Until that night, when the front door camera sent me an alert, and what I saw shattered everything. I moved into Lucas and Emily's home 3 years earlier after my husband passed. Grief has a way of hollowing out a house, especially one that was always filled with a man's laugh, his slippers by the door, his deep baritone humming from room to room. After he was gone, the silence felt too heavy for one person to carry alone. So when Lucas asked me to stay with them just until things feel less lonely, Mom, I folded my few small memories into a suitcase and came. Their home sat on a quiet suburban street, lined with maple trees that brushed against window panes when the wind picked up. From the moment I stepped inside, I noticed Emily's touches everywhere. Vanilla candles burning on the sideboard, the soft clinking of her decorative glassware, the dishwasher humming almost constantly as if the house itself shared her rhythm of neatness and control. In those early days, life was warm, soft, almost comforting. I helped in ways only a grandmother could, folding tiny clothes fresh from the dryer, rocking the baby during fussy nights, wiping down the kitchen counters with slow, familiar strokes. It felt good to be useful. I'd spent my whole life caring for others, and after losing my husband, I needed someone to need me again. Lucas worked long hours. I used to hear the garage door rumble open just past 9 p.m., most nights. He'd step into the kitchen tired but smiling, loosening his tie with one hand while patting my shoulder with the other. "Still knitting, Mom?" he'd ask, glancing at me over the back of the couch. And I would smile back, the yarn resting across my lap like an old friend. Those moments didn't last long, just a glance, a small exchange, but they anchored me. Emily at first welcomed the help. I'd see her eyes soften when I burped the baby or pulled a warm meal from the oven without being asked. She'd say things like, "Thank you, Mom," her voice light, almost grateful. And I believed her. But the thing about gratitude is that it changes shape when someone begins to see your presence not as comfort, but as competition. I can't tell you exactly when the warmth cooled, but looking back, the signs had been there, small ones like threads tugging loose from a sweater. The way Emily's heels clicked sharper against the hardwood floor in the mornings, The way her smile tightened whenever she walked into the kitchen and found me chopping vegetables. The way she began taking the baby from my arms. With a quick "I'll handle this." Not unkindly, but with a quiet insistence I couldn't quite name. At dinner the tension was even quieter, almost invisible if you weren't listening for it. Lucas would come home drained, sink into his chair and ask, "What smells so good?" without thinking. I'd catch Emily's glance, a flicker of something between annoyance and exhaustion, and though she never said a word, I felt myself shrink a little. Meals that once felt familial turned stiff over time. The clinking of cutlery became the loudest sound at the table. Even the baby's laughter felt hesitant, as if sensing something shifting in the adults around him. Back then, I told myself not to take it personally. Young mothers feel pressure, I remember that clearly from my own days of raising Lucas. Still, there was a small ache settling in my chest each time Emily brushed past me without meeting my eyes. If I had paid closer attention, I tell myself now, I would have noticed the first sign, the way Emily looked at me whenever I pulled a chair up to the dinner table. But grief makes you hold on to the good parts longer than you should. And love, especially a mother's love for her son and grandchild, can make you overlook small storms gathering in the corners of a home. In those months, I kept myself busy. Morning routines, slicing fruit, heating the kettle, wiping the fog from the window above the sink while the sun warmed the countertop. Afternoons of folding laundry and listening to the soft babble of my grandchild. Evenings of knitting while the house wound itself down into quiet. Life was familiar, predictable, almost peaceful. And then one afternoon, I didn't know it yet, but everything shifted. I caught Emily watching me, her expression unreadable as I placed a fourth plate on the dinner table. Only later would I understand what that glance meant. But at the time, I just kept setting the table, thinking the house was still the same home I had been invited into. I was wrong, and the cracks, the ones I tried so gently to ignore, were already widening beneath me, one small fissure at a time. The house had its own kind of rhythm, a soft hum you only notice when you live there long enough. The dishwasher swishing in the late afternoons, the subtle tick of the hallway clock, the rustle of Emily's planner pages as she mapped out her week with the precision of someone trying to keep her life perfectly arranged. For a long time, I fit myself into that rhythm without complaint. But slowly the rhythm changed. It began with small things, so small I told myself I imagined them. One morning I was reaching for my granddaughter's shoes, tiny pink ones with the scuffed toes she loved dragging across the floor. Emily stepped in front of me, her hand resting lightly on the doorframe. "I'll handle this, Mom," she said, not unkind, but firm. A line gently drawn. I stepped back. Of course, I told myself. Every mother wants to do things her way. But it kept happening. Every morning, every routine, her voice soft but final. "I'll feed her. I'll get her dressed. I'll pick her up from daycare." None of these were harsh, none of them cruel. But there was a quiet edge. I couldn't name something that suggested my help was beginning to feel like intrusion. Then came the look, the one she gave me when I cooked. Cooking was one of the few joys I brought with me from my old life. My husband used to say he could hear happiness in the way I chopped onions or stirred a pot. I tried to bring that same warmth into Lucas's home. Pots of simmering broth, trays of roasted vegetables, small meals that made the house smell lived in. But Emily's expression gradually shifted. A slight tightening around the eyes, hands pausing mid-task. An exhale that was almost a sigh, though she never quite let it escape fully. One afternoon, as I carried a warm dish to the table, she murmured just loud enough, "We're trying to eat lighter these days." Her words were polite, but her eyes told the truth. She didn't want me cooking anymore. Lucas never noticed the change. How could he? He was always exhausted, shoulders heavy, tie loosened before he even set his briefcase down. When he saw me, he still smiled genuinely, but he missed the silent exchanges between Emily and me. He didn't see her redirect the baby away from my lap. He didn't see her wipe down the counter after I cleaned it. He didn't hear the sighs she swallowed whenever I walked into a room at the wrong moment. To him, everything looked normal. To me, something delicate had shifted the way a picture frame slightly tilts on the wall after a small tremor. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself I was reading too much into things, that grief made me oversensitive, that motherhood sometimes makes women feel territorial. But then the changes grew, unmistakable. One day I tried connecting to the Wi-Fi. It was something simple. I wanted to video call my sister, but the password no longer worked. I reset the router with the small button at the back, thinking it must have glitched. Within minutes, Emily came into the living room. Her tone was light but her eyes sharp. "Oh, I changed it," she said. "For security." "For security," I repeated gently, not understanding. "Yes, I'll type it in for you." She didn't offer me the password. She didn't write it down. She simply typed it into my phone and handed it back without a word, a line drawn a little darker. Then came the schedule changes, quiet but intentional. I used to pick up my granddaughter from daycare every Tuesday and Thursday. It was my favorite part of the week, the rush of little arms wrapping around my waist, the shy smile she saved only for me. But one Tuesday, Emily smiled tightly and said, "Actually, I adjusted her schedule. She'll stay a bit longer now." More structure. I nodded. I didn't argue. But I felt something sink inside me, slow and heavy, like a stone dropped into deep water. And then, the moment that should have told me everything. One afternoon, I passed by their bedroom door. It was slightly open, just enough for a sliver of conversation to slip through. Emily's voice hushed, urgent. "Your mom is taking over the house." I paused, breath caught in my chest. Silence. Then her voice again, softer. "She's everywhere, Lucas. I need space. I feel like I can't breathe." I stepped away, giving them privacy, though the words lodged themselves under my ribs like splinters. I told myself I misunderstood. I told myself they were just stressed. I told myself a lot of things. But later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the front door camera blinked its small, steady light, I noticed a detail I shouldn't have ignored. A delivery. A shadow. A timing that didn't make sense. Just a small thing. A tiny ripple. But it was the first undeniable clue, the one that whispered that something in the house was shifting far more deeply than I knew. And soon, I wouldn't be able to ignore any of it. It was close to midnight when the house finally exhaled into silence. The dishwasher had completed its final cycle. The hallway clock ticked its steady rhythm. Emily's heels, those sharp, precise steps, had long since faded behind their closed bedroom door. I sat in the living room, with a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside me. The soft yellow lamp cast a warm puddle of light around my knitting, but I'd stopped moving my hands a while ago. My thoughts were elsewhere, on the Wi-Fi password Emily never shared. The schedule suddenly shifted, the small but unmistakable border she had drawn around herself every time I stepped near her. My phone was on the coffee table. When the screen lit up just for a second, I assumed it was a software update or an accidental alert. But then I saw it. Front door motion detected. At that hour, motion alerts were rare. Lucas worked late sometimes, but he always came in from the garage, not the front. And Emily was usually asleep by 11. Something in my chest tightened. I reached for the phone with fingers that trembled more than I wanted to admit. The footage was grainy at first, the front porch bathed in the soft glow of the overhead light. The wind rustled the maple leaves outside, casting shadows across the frame. Then Emily stepped into view. She wore a long beige coat, the one she only pulled out for nicer outings. Her hair was styled, not the loose ponytail she usually wore at home after dinner, but smoothed down, tucked behind her ears in a way that meant she'd been preparing to go out. At nearly midnight, she kept glancing over her shoulder as though making sure the house was still. Her breath made small white puffs in the cold night air. She paced once, twice, then stood very still. Then another figure entered the frame. A man. He wasn't close enough for me to see his face, but his posture was confident, someone familiar with arriving quietly. He didn't knock. He didn't text. He simply stepped into the light the way a person steps into a place they've been before. Emily's hand shot up to smooth her hair. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, nervous in a way I'd never seen her be with Lucas. Her eyes darted toward the window again. The man leaned closer, his voice too low for the camera's mic, but the tone, low, intimate, careful, didn't sound like the voice of a coworker or a neighbor. Emily glanced up at him, swallowed, then nodded, as if agreeing to something already decided. And then the two of them walked away from the porch together. I watched the footage twice, then again, and again. Not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because I couldn't bring myself to believe it. My tea had gone cold. My knitting lay forgotten on the couch. My hands were clenched so tightly around the phone that my knuckles ached. I pressed back on the timeline, scrolling through the week, then the week before, then further. There were patterns I'd never noticed before. Short visits during Lucas's work hours, Emily stepping outside to meet someone just beyond the camera's full frame. Small motions, hair adjusting, coat straightening, shoes, changed by the door that suddenly took on new meaning. The house had been shifting, yes. But now I understood why. A heaviness settled over me, thick and suffocating. I leaned back into the couch and closed my eyes, trying to slow my breathing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to accuse. I didn't want to hurt my son. But I also knew what I saw. I don't know how long I sat there. The lamp hummed softly. The house creaked as it cooled for the night. Somewhere in the hallway, a child's toy chimed faintly, those little bells inside rattling as if disturbed by a ghost of movement. When the bedroom door finally opened, it startled me. Emily walked into the hallway, not realizing I was awake. She wasn't dressed in her coat anymore. She now wore her usual home clothes, a loose sweater and leggings. Her makeup looked washed away. But her movements shook me more. She walked quietly, not tired, not distracted, careful, like someone who had something to hide. She passed the living room without looking in, unaware of my silhouette in the dim light. A moment later, I heard the sound of the child's door opening. Then, soft whispering and the faint creak of the rocking chair. It was the kind of tenderness a mother shows when she feels guilty, or when she wants to feel clean again after doing something she can't take back. I sank deeper into the couch, pulling the blanket over my knees. Despite the warmth of the fabric, my skin felt cold. The next morning when I came into the kitchen, Emily was standing by the counter pouring oatmeal into a bowl. Her movements were practiced smooth, but her eyes were tired, rimmed with a faint redness. She stiffened slightly when she saw me. "Morning," she said, her voice too bright for the hour. I nodded. "Good morning." Our eyes met for a brief second, and I swear she knew. Not exactly what I'd seen, but that I'd seen something. There was a flicker there, a momentary crack in her composure. She looked away quickly, grabbing a spoon, stirring too fast. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice. And I didn't want to start a battle in front of the child. But later that afternoon, I approached her as gently as I could. "Emily," I said softly, "I saw you last night. At the door." She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She didn't pretend not to know. Instead, she set the dish towel down with slow, deliberate care and looked me straight in the eye. "This has nothing to do with you," she said, her tone cool, almost expressionless. "Don't involve yourself." The coldness in her voice made something inside me go still. And then she added calmly, almost kindly, "I already have someone else helping me. You don't need to be here anymore." She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She simply cut me out of her world with the kind of precision only someone truly practiced in dismissing others can manage. I stood there feeling the quiet collapse of something I'd tried so hard to preserve. I always thought of myself as gentle, soft, sometimes even weak. But in that moment, with her words settling between us like frost, something in me hardened. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because now I understood the truth that had been living inside these walls long before I ever dared to look at the camera. And I knew the next step rested with me. I didn't sleep the night after Sarah walked out that door. You'd think at my age I'd be used to long, heavy silences, but that one pressed on my chest like a cinder block. The house felt wrong too, still too cold, like it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to tell the truth none of us wanted to face. And when morning came, I knew exactly what I had to do. Part 4 ended with me standing in that hallway, staring at the quiet house I'd kept afloat for everyone but myself. Part 5 begins with the consequences. I drove to the mortgage office as soon as they opened. The manager, a younger man with that calm, oily politeness people use when they think you're overreacting, blinked at me when I placed the paperwork on his desk. "I want to finalize the cancellation," I said. My voice didn't shake. Maybe everything else in my life was trembling, but that one thing, my decision, stood firm. He re-verified every signature, every line, every number. "Sir, to be clear, once I process this, there's no going back. I understand." I didn't tell him that I'd spent years being the one everyone leaned on, Lucas with his half-finished projects, Sarah with her invisible expectations of what a father-in-law should be, quiet, obedient, useful. I didn't tell him that Christmas Eve wasn't just an argument. It was the moment my own son looked at me like I was the problem. I walked out with the kind of silence you feel in your bones. The kind that comes after a storm, not calm exactly, but clean. By noon, word had already reached Lucas. He called me 5 times before I even pulled into my driveway. I didn't pick up. I didn't trust myself to not yet. But when I finally unlocked my door and stepped inside, the phone rang again. Persistent, desperate, and for the first time in a long time I let it. Dad, what did you do? I heard panic, not grief, not reflection, just fear of consequence. Exactly what I told you I would do, I replied. I moved slowly through the kitchen, setting my keys down, letting the heat of my own anger settle. You said I overstepped. You said you didn't want my involvement in your home. So now you don't have it. That's not what I meant, he snapped. You blindsided us. Sarah is freaking out. We have bills. Dad, how could I stopped walking. Lucas, how could you? There was silence. Not the comfortable kind. Dad, he finally said, quieter now. Sarah didn't mean what she said. She told me she already replaced me. She was upset. She asked me to leave my own grandson on Christmas. He didn't respond. You didn't stop her. Still nothing. And that was my answer. Dad, please, he said at last. Come over. Let's talk. It was the first olive branch he'd offered in months, maybe years. I'll come by, I said, but not to undo anything. When I arrived, the tension hit me the moment I stepped inside. Toys, scattered laundry, half-folded, a scent in the air that said no one had slept. Sarah sat at the dining table, fingers locked together so tightly the knuckles were white. Her eyes were red, but not from sorrow, from outrage held back by a thread. Lucas paced behind her hair, messy face pale. I stayed standing. Before anything I began, I want to be clear, I didn't come here to fight. I came here so you can understand why this happened. Sarah inhaled sharply. You humiliated us. I didn't say a word publicly. You blindsided us financially. I blinked at her. And you blindsided me emotionally. She pushed her chair back. So this is revenge. No. I shook my head. This is responsibility. Mine and yours. I helped because I wanted my grandson to have stability. But the moment you told me I needed boundaries, that I was over-present, over-helpful, over-involved, you made it clear that my support wasn't welcome. Lucas sank into the other chair. Dad. We were overwhelmed. I was stressed, she was stressed, we said things we didn't mean. You said them clearly, I replied. Both of you. Sarah finally met my eyes. There was something fierce there, but also something fragile she didn't want me to see. I didn't replace you, she said quietly. I said that because I felt like I was losing control of my own house. For a moment, I said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, I nodded. I understand that, I said, but there's a difference between setting boundaries and pushing someone out. Her lower lip trembled. She covered it with her hand. I'm sorry, she whispered, but you scared me. You were always fixing, always helping, always stepping in, and I felt like I couldn't keep up. That was the first real truth she'd given me. Lucas rubbed his forehead. Dad, we should have talked to you. We should have told you how we felt instead of letting it blow up. You should have, I agreed, and I should have stepped back sooner. I didn't read the signs. I kept trying to protect everyone, except myself. For the first time, the three of us sat in the same silence, not angry, not bitter, just honest. Sarah wiped her eyes and whispered, Is it really too late for the mortgage? Yes, I answered, but you'll manage. You're stronger than you think. She nodded, slowly, accepting it even if it stung. And as for me, I continued, I'll be here, in a new way, with the boundaries you wanted and the respect I deserve. Lucas stood and pulled me into a hug so sudden I stiffened. It had been years since he initiated one. I love you, Dad, he murmured. We'll figure this out. Together. When I finally left their house, the sun was setting, a cold winter sky, but somehow it looked softer than the night before. Maybe that's what happens when a family finally tells the truth. No villains, no heroes. Just people trying again. And at my age, that's enough. When I drove home after leaving Lucas and Sarah's place, the winter sky had already slipped into that bruised purple shade that comes right before night settles for good. Part 5 ended with that sunset, the first one in months, that didn't feel like it belonged to a battlefield. Part 6 begins with what came after the quiet, the consequences, and the small, unexpected shifts that only show up once the shouting stops. I remember turning the key in my front door and stepping into a house that still felt too large for one man, but this time, it didn't feel hostile. The silence was still there, yes, but it was a different kind, lighter, almost reflective. I set my coat on the chair, warmed up a leftover bowl of stew, and sat down at my kitchen table. It struck me how long it had been since I'd eaten a meal without rushing, without tension buzzing under my skin like an electric fence. Halfway through my meal, my phone buzzed a photo from Lucas. I hesitated before opening it. It was my grandson, still in his Christmas pajamas, scribbling something on a piece of paper with a crayon. Under the photo, Lucas wrote, "He asked to draw something for you. We'll bring it by tomorrow." I stared at that message for a long moment, not with bitterness, not with anger, just something warm I hadn't felt since before everything cracked. The next morning I got up early. Old habits die hard, and sat in my armchair with a cup of coffee, letting the steam settle over my hands. The house was quiet, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like a pause, not an ending. At 10, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Lucas holding my grandson bundled up in a puffy jacket, cheeks red from the cold. Sarah stood a few steps behind them, her posture tense but not withdrawn. "Hey, Dad," Lucas said. My grandson reached out a folded piece of paper toward me with both hands. "For you, Grandpa." I crouched down, taking it carefully like it was made of glass. It was a crayon drawing of him and me, holding hands, standing next to a messy scribble that I guessed was supposed to be a Christmas tree. I swallowed hard. This is the best gift I've gotten in years. His little face lit up like the real tree they kept in their living room. Sarah stepped forward. She didn't say anything at first, just exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since Christmas. "Can we come in?" she asked softly. I nodded. I didn't have it in me to turn them away. Truth be told, I didn't want to. Inside, we settled into the living room, Lucas on the couch, Sarah beside him, my grandson, playing with the wooden train set I kept for him when he visited. "I talked to the bank," Lucas began after a moment. "We've worked out a new plan. It's tighter than before, but we'll manage." "You will," I said. "You're capable. You just didn't believe it." Sarah looked at me with tired eyes. "I want to say something if that's okay." "Go ahead." She took a long breath. "I didn't grow up with support like this. My family was always, figure it out yourself. When you helped, I didn't know how to accept it. I felt like I owed you something I could never repay." Her voice cracked. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed. "I pushed you away," she continued. "But it wasn't because I didn't value you. It was because I didn't know how to let someone care for us without feeling inadequate." I didn't say anything for a moment, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted her words to land, and because no one had ever explained their fear to me so honestly. "I appreciate you telling me that," I finally said. "Truly. And Sarah, I never wanted you to feel indebted. I helped because I loved my son and my grandson, not because I expected anything in return." She nodded, biting the inside of her cheek. My grandson chugged his wooden train across the coffee table, blissfully unaware of the emotional excavation happening over his head. Something about that innocence made the moment feel even heavier and somehow lighter at the same time. Lucas leaned forward. "Dad, we want to start fresh. With boundaries, yes, but also with respect. Real respect. Not the kind that pretends problems aren't there. That goes both ways," I said. "I'll step back when needed. I'll let you make your decisions. But I won't stay silent if something hurts me. I've done enough of that in my life." "For what it's worth," Lucas said quietly, "I'm sorry for not sticking up for you that night." "I know," I replied. And I did. Deep down, under all that disappointment, I knew my son hadn't meant for things to explode the way they did. He'd been swept up in a moment he didn't know how to control. Sometimes, that's all it takes to shatter a family, one moment of unchecked emotion. But sometimes, it only takes another moment to begin putting it back together. We spent the rest of the morning talking not about finances, not about blame, but about moving forward, about what holidays would look like next year, about how often I'd come by, about how they'd communicate when they were overwhelmed instead of letting resentment build like rust. Before they left, my grandson ran up to me and hugged my leg. "Grandpa, come play with me tomorrow." I smoothed his hair. "I'll be there." When the door closed behind them, I stood in the quiet again. This time, though, the silence felt full. Not of loss, of possibility, of something rebuilding itself, not perfectly, not instantly, but honestly. At 70, you stop expecting big miracles. You learn to appreciate the small ones, a whispered apology, a son's honesty, a crayon drawing held out with tiny hands. And that morning in the calm, after all the storms, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long while. We still had a chance. And sometimes, a chance is all a family needs. When the door closed behind Lucas and his family that morning, Part 6 ended with me standing in a silence that finally felt full instead of hollow. Part 7 begins in that same quiet where the dust of conflict settles and the real work of rebuilding begins. I spent the next week moving slowly, deliberately. Not avoiding the past, not rushing the future, just learning how to live in the in-between. I found myself breathing a little easier each day, like the air in my home had finally thinned of all the unspoken things we'd been holding on to. On Wednesday, as I stepped onto my porch to retrieve the mail, I noticed something tucked between the railings, a small envelope with my name written in neat handwriting. Sarah's handwriting. Inside was a simple note. "Thank you for listening. We're working on things. You matter. Sarah." I stood there for a moment, the paper soft between my fingers, the winter light washing over the porch boards. It wasn't an apology wrapped in flowers or grand gestures. It was something quieter, more honest. A beginning. Later that afternoon, Lucas called. "Dad, we're having dinner Friday. Nothing fancy, just us. We'd love for you to come." There was a steadiness in his voice I hadn't heard in a long time, not defensive, not strained, just real. "Of course," I said. Friday came with a soft snowfall, the kind that doesn't stick but dusts the sidewalks like powdered sugar. I wore my old wool coat, the one my late wife used to say made me look distinguished, though age eventually did that on its own. When I knocked on their door, Sarah opened it with a small smile. Not forced, not stiff, just warm. "Come in, Dad," she said, stepping aside. The house felt different, not decorated differently, not rearranged, but emotionally different. Calmer. My grandson ran up to me, a wooden dinosaur in one hand. "Grandpa, look, it roars." He made a tiny growling noise, and I laughed, one of those quiet laughs that starts low in the chest. Dinner was simple: baked chicken, roasted carrots, mashed potatoes, but it felt like more than a meal. It felt like a table being reset. Conversations drifted in gentle waves. We talked about Lucas's work project, Sarah's new community gardening group, my grandson's obsession with dinosaurs, and how he insisted they still lived in the forest somewhere, just hiding. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heavy. It was normal. And sometimes normal is the most precious thing of all. Halfway through dinner, Sarah cleared her throat. "Can I say something?" she asked. Lucas set down his fork and nodded. "Go ahead." She looked at me, her eyes steady. "I want to rebuild trust. Slowly. Honestly. No pretending." She paused. "And I want you to feel like this is your family too. Because it is." The ticking of the wall clock softened into the space between us. "I appreciate that," I said. "And I'll match the effort. I'm not here to take over. I'm here to stand beside you when you need me, and give you space when you don't." Something eased in her shoulders like a weight she'd been carrying alone. After dinner, while Sarah cleaned up and Lucas put our little guy to bed, I stood by the living room window. Outside, the street lamp spread a warm cone of light over the snow-dusted sidewalk. It reminded me of the nights I used to drive home after late shifts when Lucas was still a boy, with that same soft glow guiding me back from exhaustion. Those memories didn't hurt the way they used to. They felt like stepping stones now, markers of where we'd been, not anchors holding us down. Lucas joined me at the window. "Dad," he said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot. About that night. About everything." I let him speak. He needed to. "You were right. I wasn't seeing the full picture. I thought being a husband meant defending my home at all costs, but I didn't realize sometimes the threat isn't outside. Sometimes it's the way we handle things inside." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry I let it get that far." "You're learning," I said. "We all are." He nodded, and the two of us stood there for a moment, 2 generations of men who'd made our mistakes, trying to do better. As I prepared to leave, Sarah handed me a small container. "Leftovers," she said, "for tomorrow." It was such a simple gesture, but simple gestures, when sincere, carry more weight than any apology. When I stepped outside, the cold bit gently at my cheeks. The snow had stopped, leaving the world quiet and clean. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time, something steady, anchored deep in my chest. Not victory, not relief. Something like peace. Families don't heal in one conversation. They don't fix themselves with a single dinner or a single apology. Healing happens in these small, ordinary moments where you choose understanding over ego, patience over pride. The night after that quiet family dinner, I found myself standing once again in front of the front door camera, the very one that had changed everything. But this time, I didn't tap into the app. I didn't reach for old footage. I didn't look for answers in a small, glowing screen. I simply rested my hand against the cold metal frame and breathed. For so long I thought that camera was what saved my family, that the truth had come from a lens watching over us. But standing there in the stillness of my porch, I understood something deeper. The camera didn't save us. The truth did. And the courage to face it. I turned the device off that night. Not out of fear, out of peace. Some chapters don't need constant watching. Some stories are meant to be lived, not replayed. When I stepped back inside, the house felt warmer than it had in months. Lived in, loved in. A place where healing didn't shout, it settled quietly like soft dust on the windowsill. And as I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea, I wondered, if you were in my place, would you have pressed play? Would you have dared to watch the thing you feared most? Or would you have turned away and lived in the comfort of not knowing? Stories like mine aren't perfect. Families aren't perfect. But sometimes one honest moment, no matter how painful, can open the door to something better. Thank you for listening to my story, truly. If it touched you, please share it, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and whether you've ever faced a truth you didn't want to see. Your stories matter too.